billionaire told his pregnant wife to sleep in the guest room, while the mistress took her place in bed. In a city of gleaming skyscrapers and whispered secrets, one scandal has ignited an inferno of gossip behind every closed door. Meet Jonathan Pierce, the charismatic millionaire whose lavish parties once drew envy from every corner of the elite, yet whose private life stands on the brink of spectacular collapse. His pregnant wife, Marianne, carries his unborn child, but that hasn't stopped Jonathan from conducting a scandalous affair with a beautiful mistress he installs in the marital bed itself. What dark obsession fuels Jonathan's betrayal? And will Marianne fight to save her marriage or exact a vengeance that could tear the entire empire apart? Jonathan Pierce was a man used to getting what he wanted, no questions asked. Born in Boston to a working-class family, his ambition and natural charm catapulted him to dizzying heights. At 37, Jonathan was the face of Pierce Investments, with an estimated net worth of over $300 million. His name popped up frequently in business magazines, and the public followed his meteoric rise from rags to riches as though it were a modern American fairy tale. He had met Marianne Hollister, now Marianne Pierce, when they were both in their 20s. Marianne came from a relatively modest background in the outskirts of Chicago. She had been juggling college and part-time work at a local bakery where Jonathan, a hungry young grad student in need of a late-night sandwich, first encountered her. Their romance was rapid but genuine, fueled by a mutual drive to create something better for themselves than the lives they had known. They married after only a year of dating, forging a bond that seemed unshakable to everyone who knew them. For the first few years, Marianne had supported Jonathan's ambitions wholeheartedly. She left her own small business pursuits in interior design to handle the social side of his blossoming investments firm. She arranged dinner parties, courted new investors with well-planned gatherings, and managed the philanthropic arm of Pierce Investments. She was the devoted wife behind the charismatic business genius until a piece of joyous news arrived. She was pregnant. At first, Jonathan embraced the idea of becoming a father. Marianne saw this baby as the missing piece in their otherwise immaculate life. Yet, as her belly grew, an odd shift in Jonathan's behavior took hold. He began to complain more about her exhaustion and her mood swings. He hinted that her body changing was a distraction to his own creative flow. She tried to shrug it off, believing stress from an upcoming deal might be fueling his irritability. Yet the deeper into pregnancy she went, the further Jonathan seemed to slip away. Friends whispered that something was amiss, but Marianne never dared to believe he could be unfaithful. Until one day she found a lipstick-stained wine glass in the master bedroom. The shade was a bright scarlet she had never worn. Marianne confronted Jonathan that evening, and he didn't even bother denying it. Instead, with uncanny composure, Jonathan admitted he had been seeing someone else for months, a striking, dark-haired beauty named Angelica Rossetti. The revelation alone was enough to break Marianne's heart, but what followed was more shocking. Jonathan demanded that Marianne vacate the master bedroom, the bed they had shared for nearly 6 years, so that Angelica could stay in the house without feeling awkward. He brushed off Marianne's horror with an argument that it was a necessary arrangement for his mental well-being and future success. He insisted Marianne had become too emotional, too sensitive because of her pregnancy, and that he needed tranquility. That night, Marianne, 5 months pregnant, sobbed on the couch in the living room, battling disbelief and humiliation. Each tear that fell was a testament to the monstrous betrayal she faced and the uncertain road that lay ahead. The Pierce mansion was a modern marvel perched on a hill just outside Manhattan. The house had floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River, a pool that sparkled under evening lights, and an interior designed with no expense spared: Italian marble floors, crystal chandeliers from Venice, plush, hand-woven rugs from Marrakesh. Once a symbol of the couple's shared dream, it now felt like a daunting prison to Marianne. When Angelica Rossetti waltzed in the following day, she wasn't shy about flaunting her new position. She was a curvy, confident woman in her late 20s with piercing eyes and glossy black hair that cascaded down her back in perfect waves. Her designer dresses clung to her frame in ways that hinted she was well aware of her seductive power. She looked at Marianne not with remorse or embarrassment, but with an almost triumphant smile. Jonathan was no longer the doting husband Marianne had once known. He introduced Angelica to some of the staff, telling them she would be staying indefinitely. The staff, many of whom cared deeply about Marianne, struggled to mask their shock. Some days, Marianne caught glimpses of the servants, exchanging hushed words in the hallway. She could sense their pity, which only added to her shame. Marianne retreated to the guest room on the second floor, a small, comfortable space that looked out onto the grounds rather than the city skyline. She spent nights alone, feeling her baby shift in her womb, grappling with heartbreak. She knew she had to make a choice: remain a silent prisoner in her own home or fight back to reclaim what was hers. But her resolve wavered. Jonathan's business connections reached far and wide. Breaking from him could lead to public scrutiny, especially because Pierce Investments was on the brink of launching its next major project, a massive real estate development in partnership with a multinational conglomerate, Walton and Price, rumored to be partially funded by the granddaughter of one of the original Rockefeller family members. Marianne couldn't fathom taking on Jonathan while pregnant, knowing the resources he could marshal against her. Yet she wasn't one to surrender easily, not with a child on the way. On a particularly cold morning, Marianne sat in the guest room, her hands protectively folded over her swollen belly, and plotted her next moves. She decided to reach out to an old friend, Robert Davis, a lawyer she'd known since her early 20s in Chicago. Robert was savvy, having built a respectable career in corporate law. He had never fully trusted Jonathan, always hinting that behind that charming smile lay a shark circling its prey. Marianne dialed Robert's number, tears brimming in her eyes, but determination stealing her voice. When Robert answered, the warmth in his tone was immediate. He asked how she was doing, and she hesitated for a moment, wrestling with her emotions. Finally, she burst out, explaining every lurid detail of what she was enduring. Robert's shock was palpable. He urged her to gather evidence: emails, text messages, any financial documents that might prove Jonathan's misconduct. If it came to a divorce, or worse, a custody battle, Marianne would need every advantage. Marianne took his advice to heart. Over the next few weeks, she began collecting stray receipts left on Jonathan's desk, photographing suspicious entries in his ledger, and discreetly installing a phone recording app on the rarely used landline in his study. Though guilt pricked at her, especially since she had never imagined deceiving Jonathan, she knew she had to protect herself and her unborn child. With each new piece of evidence, her heartbreak evolved into a fierce, protective instinct. Meanwhile, tension in the house rose. Angelica's presence was like a dark shadow creeping through the halls. Jonathan, emboldened by his affair being out in the open, no longer shielded Marianne from their intimate relationship. There were nights Marianne could hear Angelica's laughter echoing through the walls, accompanied by Jonathan's low murmurs. Sometimes Marianne caught Angelica's smug grin when they crossed paths in the living room or the kitchen. During a heated argument one evening, Marianne demanded that Jonathan consider the ramifications of his actions. She stood at the bottom of the grand staircase, tears burning her cheeks, while Jonathan leaned over the banister with disdain. "You're humiliating me in front of everyone," she cried. "No, you're humiliating yourself." he retorted, his voice like ice. "If you can't handle the new arrangement, you can leave. But you won't, will you? Because you need me, you always have." A twist arrived unannounced one day in the form of a visitor, Deborah Pierce, Jonathan's widowed mother. She was in her mid-60s, with silvering hair pulled back into a neat chignon and sharp brown eyes that often missed nothing. Deborah had always been a complex figure in Jonathan's life, supportive of his ambitions, but never afraid to criticize him for moral failings. She and Marianne had enjoyed a cordial relationship, though Deborah's loyalty to her son typically overshadowed all else. Deborah arrived with luggage in tow, claiming she needed to spend some time in the city for a medical checkup, and decided to stay with her son. Marianne could see the flicker of confusion and disapproval cross Deborah's face when she noticed Angelica's presence at the mansion. Jonathan, oddly uncomfortable, tried to play it off as though Angelica was merely a guest. But Deborah was nobody's fool. She cornered Marianne in the kitchen the following day, eyes narrowed. "What in the world is going on, Marianne?" she asked bluntly. Marianne hesitated, tears threatening to surface. "You'd have to ask your son," she finally managed, trying to keep her composure. That night, Deborah confronted Jonathan. Their voices rose in the living room, audible even to the staff. Marianne, behind the door, heard fragments. "Point married, and she's pregnant. Point my life, my decisions. No regard for decency. You'll destroy everything you worked for." Angelica, standing at the top of the stairs, eavesdropped with a scowl. When Deborah emerged, she looked profoundly disturbed. She found Marianne in the hallway and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder, whispering, "I'm sorry for what my son has done. I thought I raised him better." Marianne broke down, clinging to Deborah's arm, barely able to speak. Deborah guided her to the guest room, helped her sit on the bed, and brought her a glass of water. Though Deborah didn't outright criticize her own son in detail, the apology told Marianne that Jonathan's mother sympathized with her plight. Deborah stayed for a week, repeatedly attempting to talk sense into Jonathan, but each confrontation ended in raised voices and no resolution. Angelica tried to avoid Deborah, offering stiff politeness whenever they crossed paths, but the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Marianne found a measure of solace in having an ally, even though Deborah eventually had to return to her home in Boston, leaving with a resigned sigh and a final warning for Jonathan. "Mark my words, you'll regret what you're doing." As the days passed, Marianne began noticing oddities about Angelica. She was strikingly confident, yes, but there were subtle inconsistencies to her stories. Once, Marianne overheard her telling Jonathan she was from a wealthy family in Italy, referencing a lavish childhood. Another time, Marianne caught Angelica telling a staff member that she grew up in a small apartment in Brooklyn. The differences were too glaring to be simple memory slips. Furthermore, Marianne occasionally saw Angelica pacing on the phone in the garden, speaking hushed, frantic words in a language that might have been Italian, or perhaps Spanish. Marianne couldn't be certain, but the tone was always tense. Then there were the peculiar financial transactions. Jonathan had given Angelica a credit card linked to his personal account. Marianne, though now delegated to the guest room, still had some oversight on household finances. Late one night, while everyone was asleep, Marianne accessed the shared financial statements. She discovered that Angelica had made numerous expensive purchases: jewelry, designer clothes, even real estate showings. More worrisome were large wire transfers from an unknown account into one of Jonathan's newly opened investment ventures, a shell company Marianne had never heard of. The sums were so enormous that they rivaled Jonathan's typical business capital injections. Something about the arrangement smelled of blackmail or hidden agendas. Why was Angelica funneling large sums into Jonathan's new shell company? Was Angelica actually wealthier than she claimed, or was she working for someone else who was investing heavily in Jonathan's enterprise? Marianne confronted Jonathan about these suspicious transactions, but he dismissed her concerns. "Stay out of my business," he snapped. "You've lost the right to ask questions the moment you turned your back on me. But you're turning your back on me and our child," she replied, voice quavering. "It's not that simple," he hissed, though he offered no further explanation. Marianne stepped away, stunned by the coldness in his voice. She remembered the sweet young man who used to chase her around the bakery counter to steal a kiss. How had he become this merciless? She could only guess that success had eroded the moral fiber that once anchored him, or that he had been entangled in something bigger than either of them realized. Distressed but not defeated, Marianne reached out to Robert Davis once more, explaining the new developments. Robert's tone over the phone was grim. "This might be bigger than just adultery," he said. "There could be some financial crimes if these wire transfers are suspicious. Gather all the data you can and stay safe, Marianne." She also confided in an old college friend, Alicia Parker, who had moved to New York City a few years ago to open a PR firm. Alicia, usually vivacious and brimming with flamboyant energy, was shocked to learn the gravity of Marianne's predicament. When Marianne finally met Alicia at a discreet cafe near the MoMA, the two spent hours talking, tears occasionally slipping from Marianne's eyes. Alicia offered emotional support and a listening ear, hugging Marianne and telling her she deserved better. As Marianne's pregnancy progressed from 5 to 6 months, her body ached with the stress of betrayal and fear for the future. The loyal household staff sensed her turmoil. The housekeeper, Mistress Patel, would bring her extra blankets and herbal teas to ease her frazzled nerves. Marianne found momentary comfort in such small kindnesses, glimpses of humanity amid the cruelty overshadowing her life. One evening, Marianne heard raised voices emanating from Jonathan's study. She recognized Jonathan's sharp tone, but the second voice was unfamiliar, male, cold, and authoritarian. The conversation was muffled, but a few words slipped past the door. "My money, your responsibility, Angelica. Keep up appearances." The mention of Angelica's name sent a chill through Marianne. She pressed her ear to the door, but footsteps approached, and she darted down the hallway, heart pounding. Later that night, Marianne began noticing changes in Jonathan's demeanor. His face grew taut with worry, as though he carried an invisible weight. She also caught glimpses of Angelica's face, twisted in fear, quickly masked by a forced smile whenever Jonathan turned his gaze on her. Something was happening behind the scenes, and it involved more than just an affair. In the next few weeks, the cracks in Jonathan and Angelica's relationship widened. Angelica grew more demanding, insisting on lavish gifts, more control in the mansion, and even started bossing around the staff as though she were the lady of the house. Jonathan tolerated it to a point, but his patience wore thin. One morning, Marianne overheard them bickering in the master bedroom. Angelica's shrill voice echoed through the hallway. "You promised me you'd close this deal, Jonathan. We had an arrangement." Marianne froze, straining to hear more. She heard Jonathan respond with unusual desperation. "I'm trying. You think it's that easy to funnel this kind of money without alerting the entire board? They're suspicious." Marianne's mind whirled. She remembered the suspicious wire transfers. Could Angelica have orchestrated some black market dealings that Jonathan got entangled in? Was she blackmailing him for access to his connections and financial channels? That day, Marianne decided to take a calculated risk. She placed a small digital recorder inside the master bedroom closet. If Jonathan and Angelica continued their incriminating discussions, she might capture enough evidence to expose Angelica's real motivations and perhaps Jonathan's complicity. It was a bold, nerve-wracking move, but Marianne was resolved. If she had to blow the whistle on whatever criminal or unethical activity was happening, she would, if only to protect her unborn child's future. In the midst of her covert investigations, Marianne also wrestled with a swirling storm of emotions. Despite Jonathan's betrayal, a part of her still longed for the man he used to be. There were nights she dreamed of the early days of their marriage, simple dinners, dancing in the living room, traveling to scenic beaches. She woke to the harsh reality that the father of her unborn child was now more a stranger than a partner. A tipping point arrived one evening when Marianne found Jonathan alone in the lounge, slumped in an armchair, his tie loosened and a half-empty glass of whiskey trembling in his hand. His expression was haunted, all arrogance stripped away. The surreal sight made Marianne pause at the doorway. Gone was the commanding figure who once exiled her to a guest room. Softly she stepped inside. "Jonathan!" she said. He glanced up, eyes glassy. "Leave me alone," he muttered, though his voice lacked its usual venom. Marianne set aside her anger for a moment. Despite everything, seeing him this broken triggered a wave of pity. She sat down in an armchair opposite him. There was silence for what felt like an eternity. Then Jonathan spoke in a hushed tone, as though confessing to the air rather than to her. "You think I wanted any of this?" he said bitterly. "I messed up, Marianne. The first messed up bad." Marianne's heart hammered. Was he finally going to reveal the truth? She forced herself to remain calm. "Tell me," she said quietly. "Maybe it's not too late to fix it." He let out a harsh laugh. "Not too late? You don't know the half of it. There's money involved. Big money. Angelica brought in a group of investors from overseas. Said they could multiply my wealth if I helped them bypass certain legal red tape. I was stupid. I got greedy. Then they started pressuring me, threatening to expose me if I didn't comply." He swallowed. "I tried to break it off, but she has photos, documents. I could lose everything. And they promised me a fortune so big, it seemed worth it at first." Marianne clenched her fists, anger coursing through her veins. "So you sold out your family for a pile of money?" Her voice trembled with a mixture of fury and heartbreak. Jonathan rubbed his forehead, tears welling in his eyes. "I never meant for it to go this far. I thought I'd keep you safe by pushing you away." "God, I don't know anymore." Marianne rose abruptly, her heart pounding. "Do you even realize what you've done to me, to our child?" He broke down then, head in his hands. "I'm sorry," he croaked, as if the word could undo the months of torment. But Marianne wasn't ready to console him, not after everything he'd put her through. She turned on her heel and left him there, despair etched across his face. That night, she cried herself to sleep in the guest room, torn between pity for the father of her child and a scorching rage at the man who had betrayed her. Angelica's behavior grew increasingly erratic in the days that followed. She constantly berated Jonathan over the phone, demanded more money, and threatened to share incriminating evidence if he didn't hold up his end of the deal. Marianne noticed that Angelica rarely slept in the master bedroom anymore. She spent long hours pacing the house or vanishing for undisclosed appointments. Whenever she encountered Marianne, she wore a tight-lipped scowl, as though blaming her for Jonathan's sudden reluctance to proceed with the illicit scheme. One night, Marianne retrieved the recording device from the closet. She listened to the tapes in the secrecy of her bathroom, the only place she felt safe from prying eyes. As she hit play, a conversation crackled to life. "Jonathan, if the board finds out about the shell company, it's over. My entire career, everything gone. Angelica, you promised me. My investors are waiting. If you don't deliver, they'll come for you. They'll come for all of us. Jonathan, I need more time. Angelica, time is a luxury we don't have. Don't forget I have the photos. And your precious Marianne. You really want her involved in this?" Marianne's blood ran cold. She paused the tape, her heart pounding. It was evident Angelica, and whoever she was working with, possessed threats strong enough to corner Jonathan, who in turn had tried to shield Marianne in the worst way possible by destroying their marriage facade. Marianne realized that if Angelica's cohorts were truly dangerous, her own life and that of her unborn child were in peril. This wasn't just heartbreak, it was survival. She immediately contacted Robert Davis. Over a crackling phone line, she explained everything. Robert listened with deadly seriousness. "You need to get out of that house, Marianne," he said. "Gather all the evidence, but don't risk your safety. I'll arrange for a private investigator and potentially contact the authorities once we have enough. Do not confront them alone." Yet Marianne hesitated. Despite all the betrayal, Jonathan had confessed, indicating regret. She also worried that a sudden flight would tip off Angelica and her associates. If they discovered Marianne had evidence, it might provoke a more lethal response. Instead, Marianne resolved to play it smart, appear compliant, gather final evidence, and then escape when Angelica and Jonathan least expected it. Unexpectedly, Angelica cornered Marianne in the hallway one afternoon. The mistress's eyes were burning with pent-up rage or desperation, or both. She slammed a hand against the wall, blocking Marianne's path. "You think you can just lurk around, pregnant and pathetic, and not pay the price?" Angelica hissed, her voice dripping with venom. Marianne's heart slammed against her ribcage, but she fought to keep her composure. "You've already taken my husband and my home. What else do you want?" Angelica leaned in. "I'm on to you. I know you've been snooping around, collecting receipts, looking at bank statements. Jonathan isn't half as clever as he thinks. And you're just a nuisance." She spat the last word like poison. Marianne refused to look away. "If you're trying to threaten me, be careful. I'm the mother of Jonathan's child. That means something even to him." Angelica snorted. "Jonathan is a pawn, and so are you. Don't get in my way, or I'll make you regret it." Her lips twisted into a sneer before she stalked off, high heels clicking ominously against the marble floor. Shaken, Marianne retreated to the guest room, tears welling. She cradled her belly, whispering reassurances to the life growing inside her. She realized she had to act soon. If Angelica suspected her, the danger had escalated. Robert Davis had put her in touch with a private investigator named Gwen Harrison, an unflappable woman in her 50s with a background in federal law enforcement. Gwen was discreet and swift. She installed surveillance equipment in Marianne's car when Marianne ventured out for a doctor's appointment. Over the next several days, Gwen tailed Angelica across the city, documenting meetings, conversations, and capturing photographs. Then, late one evening, Gwen delivered a sealed envelope to Marianne. Inside was a dossier revealing Angelica's real identity. Born Angela Rossi, she was affiliated with a clandestine organization known for laundering money through luxury real estate and art auctions. The group had been under federal investigation for years, but they were careful, always recruiting individuals like Jonathan, wealthy, ambitious business people who could help them weave illicit funds through legitimate businesses. Angelica had specifically targeted Jonathan, known for his hunger for success and a once carefree approach to business ethics. She seduced him, gained his trust, and set up shell companies with him. Their arrangement had escalated into a personal affair fueled by Jonathan's impulsive lust and the promise of an even bigger financial windfall. But the deeper Jonathan sank, the more Angelica manipulated him with blackmail. Marianne closed the folder, her hands trembling. Now she understood the lethal tightrope Jonathan was walking and how she'd been forced to watch from the sidelines as her marriage crumbled. Part of her still felt a spark of empathy for Jonathan, while another part ached with fury that he had tossed her aside instead of coming clean. She resolved that she would be the one to bring this entire house of cards crashing down before Angelica's organization could harm her or her baby. With Robert's counsel and Gwen's evidence, Marianne formulated a plan. They would present the evidence to a federal investigator, someone who had been sniffing around Pierce Investments for months, suspecting anomalies in certain overseas transactions. In exchange for immunity, or at least leniency, Jonathan might be willing to testify against Angelica's network, thus safeguarding Marianne and the baby. But first, Marianne needed Jonathan on board. She found him in his study the following night, staring blankly at a ledger of numbers that likely reflected the mounting tension. She locked the door behind her. "We need to talk," she said quietly. He looked up, hollow-eyed. "If it's about Angelica, it's about everything." Marianne stepped forward, dropping Gwen's dossier on the desk. "I know everything, Jonathan. About Angelica's real identity, about the money laundering, all of it." He flinched, flipping through the pages. "How, when did you—" Marianne placed a trembling hand on his. "I got help. And so should you. If you come forward, there's a chance the authorities will cut you a deal. But if you keep going, you're going to lose your freedom, your reputation, and maybe your life. And Angelica, she won't hesitate to throw you under the bus." Jonathan's face contorted in guilt and fear. "They threatened me, Marianne. Threatened you." I didn't know what to do. Marianne's anger simmered beneath the surface, but she forced herself to remain composed. "I can't forgive what you did to our marriage, but I'm not going to let the father of my child destroy himself. Work with me. Work with the authorities." In that moment, it was as though a dam broke inside Jonathan. Tears welled in his eyes. "I'll do it," he said, voice trembling. "I just want to end this nightmare." They called Robert, who immediately set up a meeting with a federal contact. Jonathan was prepared to offer a statement detailing his involvement with Angelica's organization. Yet the next step was the most dangerous, confronting Angelica and orchestrating her arrest without giving her time to flee. Robert collaborated with the federal authorities to plan a sting operation that would culminate in Angelica's arrest. Jonathan would lure her into a confession by promising he would finalize the last wire transfer, the one that would solidify the entire deal. Meanwhile, Marianne would remain hidden, ready to provide any assistance needed. The authorities would be stationed nearby, ready to intervene at the critical moment. The night of the sting arrived. Marianne, 7 months pregnant, and her nerves frayed, monitored events from a secure room upstairs, connected to Robert and Gwen via a discreet earpiece. Downstairs in the study, Jonathan waited, pacing the floor. He had told Angelica he was ready to sign over the final portion of the funds to the shell company. Angelica finally arrived, her high heels clicking methodically on the marble floor. The staff had been discreetly dismissed for the evening. She stepped into the study, wearing a black fitted dress that accentuated her curves. Her lips painted a deep red. The tension crackled. "Are we done with the theatrics?" she asked Jonathan coldly. "Where's the money?" Jonathan forced a polite smile. "Right here." He gestured to his computer, open to a transaction page. "But I need assurances." Her eyes narrowed. "Assurances?" Jonathan nodded. "I need to know you'll destroy every photo, every document. My wife and I, we have a baby on the way." He let out a shaky breath, feigning heartbreak. "I don't want them involved in this." Angelica approached slowly, a predatory gleam in her eyes. "Your wife means nothing to me. I'll do as I please when I decide. Now, hurry up, Jonathan. Transfer the money, or your precious Marianne will learn all about your darkest secrets. Not to mention you'll be behind bars." Jonathan inhaled sharply, acting the part of a panicked man. He pressed a few keys, initiating the transaction. "It's done," he whispered, voice trembling. "You have it now." Angelica's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, verifying the deposit. Finally she purred. Then her expression turned sinister. "Don't think we're finished. My investors want more. If you don't comply, you'll regret." Suddenly, the door burst open. Federal agents, along with Gwen, flooded into the study. Angelica's eyes widened. She made a desperate scramble for her handbag, presumably for a weapon, but the agents quickly pinned her arms back and disarmed her. Jonathan slumped into a chair, burying his face in his hands. Marianne watched the scene unfold on a small video feed upstairs, her heart hammering so violently she felt lightheaded. She pressed a hand to her belly, feeling the baby kick in response to her own adrenaline. Finally, the nightmare seemed to be coming to an end. Angelica was taken into custody in a whirlwind of flashing lights and shouted orders, her voice echoing in the marble foyer as she hurled curses at the federal agents. The sharp clack of her designer heels screeched against the polished floors when she tried to twist free, but two officers gripped her by the arms and marched her out of the mansion. Her last venomous words were a promise of revenge directed at Jonathan and Marianne alike. Inside the study, a tense silence replaced Angelica's shrill threats. The agents confiscated her phone, her laptop, and multiple folders stuffed with suspicious documents. A few took photographs of the high-tech computer setup on Jonathan's desk and methodically checked hidden compartments inside the large mahogany filing cabinets. Each new discovery sharpened the gravity of the situation, revealing just how deeply Angelica, and by extension, Jonathan had become entangled with a sprawling criminal syndicate. Marianne stood just outside the study door, her heart pounding. She was 7 months pregnant, and the stress of Angelica's arrest had jolted her system like a physical shock. Still, she held herself upright, refusing to appear weak in front of the strangers bustling around her home. She clutched the banister for support, wincing whenever she heard the brisk tones of the agents giving orders or describing the evidence into their radios. Before leaving, the lead agent, a tall woman with a firm handshake and empathetic eyes, spoke to Jonathan and Marianne in private. "We'll be in touch soon, Mr. Pierce. We appreciate your cooperation so far, but we'll require further statements, and you'll likely be called to testify if this goes to trial. For your own security, avoid discussing specifics with anyone outside of your legal team. Miss S. Pierce." The agent turned to Marianne, softening her voice. "We know this is a difficult time. If you have any concerns about your safety or your baby, don't hesitate to contact our office directly." Marianne nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Jonathan placed a hand on her shoulder, tentative, as if seeking permission to offer comfort. She didn't shrug him off, but neither did she lean into him. Together, they watched in silence as the federal vehicles pulled away, the red and blue lights flickering across the manicured lawn before disappearing into the night. In the days that followed, news outlets latched onto the scandal like ravenous hawks. Whispers of money laundering, blackmail, and a mistress living under the same roof as the millionaire's pregnant wife made sensational headlines. Paparazzi camped outside the mansion gates, hoping for a glimpse of Jonathan Pierce or any dramatic altercation involving Marianne. The press hammered at Pierce Investments, hungry for a statement on the criminal allegations swirling around its founder. Jonathan's once sterling reputation took a devastating hit. Even before the official details became clear, rumors circulated on Wall Street that Pierce Investments was embroiled in a major federal investigation. Shareholders grew skittish, stock prices wobbled, and anxious employees braced themselves for layoffs. Jonathan spent long hours on the phone with board members and attorneys, trying to control the fallout. Meanwhile, Marianne fielded endless calls from acquaintances and friends who suddenly realized they had front-row tickets to the scandal of the decade. Some calls were genuine, offering her support. Others were thinly veiled attempts to dig up gossip. Alicia Parker, Marianne's old college friend, and now a successful PR consultant, took charge of the situation. She drafted a carefully worded statement. Jonathan Pierce was voluntarily assisting in an ongoing federal investigation, positioned as a victim of Angelica's manipulations, a half-truth designed to salvage what was left of his public image. Despite the official statement, a grey cloud of suspicion hung over the mansion. Jonathan's mother, Deborah Pierce, arrived unannounced the next morning, determination flashing in her eyes. The moment she stepped into the foyer, she asked for Marianne. Finding her in the sitting room, Deborah enveloped her daughter-in-law in a tight hug, whispering, "I'm sorry for what my son has done. I'm sorry for everything you've gone through." Tears pricked Marianne's eyes. She allowed herself a brief moment of comfort in Deborah's embrace, grateful that at least one member of the Pierce family openly acknowledged the injustice Marianne had endured. Deborah spared Jonathan no mercy when she finally spoke to him in private. Their voices reverberated through the corridor, tension escalating to the point where Marianne worried it might erupt into a shouting match. Yet eventually, Deborah emerged from Jonathan's makeshift office, formerly the guest parlor, looking grim and tearful. Her gaze was filled with both disappointment and a vestige of maternal love. She informed Marianne that, while she couldn't condone Jonathan's actions, she intended to stay for a while to help manage the chaos. With Angelica gone, the mansion felt different, quieter, but unsettled. The staff who remained were unsure how to navigate this new normal. Mistress Patel, the devoted housekeeper, seemed relieved to see Angelica out of the picture, but the constant media attention and unannounced visits from investigators rattled her nerves. She confided in Marianne one afternoon, dabbing sweat from her brow, "Miss Pierce, all I want is for this house to be peaceful again for you, for the baby, for Mr. Pierce, if he can make things right." Marianne's response was a tight, sad smile. She knew that peace was still a distant dream. Trust in Jonathan was shattered, leaving a raw ache that wouldn't heal overnight or perhaps ever. Each time the phone rang or a news anchor mentioned Pierce Investments, her heart twisted with anxiety for her unborn child's future. How could she bring a baby into a family so publicly disgraced and privately broken? Still, there were slivers of hope. The day after Angelica's arrest, Marianne walked into the nursery, a room she had barely set foot in since the entire ordeal escalated. Dust motes floated in the morning light, illuminating the half-finished crib, stacks of baby blankets and scattered plush toys awaiting final placement. For the first time in weeks, Marianne carefully picked up one of the pastel-colored, stuffed animals and pressed it against her swelling belly. In the reflective hush of that moment, she realized that her child deserved a chance at a life free from the shadows of deceit and scandal. Somewhere in the house, Jonathan was talking to lawyers, trying to salvage his reputation and the company he had built from scratch. Deborah was on the phone, coordinating medical appointments for her own health, but also checking in on Marianne's prenatal care. Alicia was busy crafting social media updates to stem the tide of speculation. Piece by piece, a semblance of order struggled to emerge from the rubble of betrayal and criminal plots. Yet the question lingered, could Jonathan and Marianne ever restore the love that once made them partners? Or would they remain bound solely by the child they would soon welcome into a world turned upside down? As the hushed tension of the mansion thickened, all anyone could do was wait, hope, and brace for what the next day might bring. Though Angelica was gone, the chasm between Jonathan and Marianne remained immense. One evening, Jonathan knocked on the guest room door. Marianne opened it, arms folded, her belly pronounced as she stood there, quietly dignified. "We need to talk," he said softly. She stepped aside, letting him in. He cast his gaze around the modest guest room, a far cry from the opulence of the master suite. Guilt flickered across his features. He sank onto a small armchair. "I don't expect forgiveness," he began, "but I'd like a chance to make things right, at least for the sake of our child." Marianne felt tears prick her eyes, but her voice was steady. "What does making things right look like to you?" Jonathan hesitated. "I'm prepared to sign over a significant portion of my assets to you and the baby, regardless of whether we remain married. I'm working with the authorities, giving them every detail. It'll probably ruin my reputation, but if it means keeping you safe." He trailed off. Marianne closed her eyes. You hurt me in ways I never imagined. You humiliated me, cast me aside to share a bed with your mistress while I was pregnant with your child. That kind of betrayal doesn't vanish overnight. A haunted look crossed Jonathan's face. I know, he whispered, but I will spend the rest of my life trying to atone if you'll let me. If not, I accept the consequences. She rested a hand on her belly. Let me think. My first priority is our child. Whether we can rebuild anything beyond that remains uncertain. Jonathan nodded, tears glistening in his eyes. Fair enough. He rose and left, leaving Marianne to wrestle with her swirling emotions: anger, heartbreak, a vestige of love, and a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, she could salvage something for the child they both would soon welcome into the world. In the weeks that followed, Marianne attended frequent prenatal checkups. Stress weighed heavily, but each reassuring ultrasound reminded her why she was enduring so much. She and Jonathan maintained a civil relationship, focusing on preparations for the baby. Jonathan gave her space, taking up residence in another guest room, away from the master suite that Angelica had tainted with her presence. Together, they quietly set up a nursery in a sunny corner of the mansion, selecting soft pastel colors and a crib that Deborah insisted on gifting. Marianne felt conflicting emotions every time Jonathan helped measure curtains or assemble furniture. There were moments of silent camaraderie, fleeting instances where Marianne almost remembered the love they once shared. Meanwhile, the legal ordeal advanced. Jonathan appeared before investigators, providing testimonies that led to further arrests in Angelica's money laundering ring. The media had a field day, painting Jonathan as both a cunning businessman and a gullible pawn. Pierce Investments teetered on the brink of collapse. However, a statement of support from Walton and Price, who recognized Jonathan's cooperation with the feds, helped to stabilize the situation just enough that the company didn't implode outright. On a crisp autumn morning, one that dawned bright and full of promise, Marianne went into labor. The staff rushed to her side, and Jonathan dashed into the room, panic etched on his features. Despite everything, he held Marianne's hand as they sped to the hospital. Through hours of pain and fearful waiting, they endured together. Finally, a wailing cry echoed in the delivery room. A nurse placed a squirming, pink-faced baby girl in Marianne's arms. Tears streamed down Marianne's cheeks as she looked at her daughter, overwhelmed by a fierce maternal love. Jonathan, standing beside her, gazed at his child with an expression of awe and remorse. In that moment, the betrayal and heartbreak momentarily faded, replaced by the miracle of new life. They named her Lily Grace Pierce, a name Marianne had chosen early on, symbolizing hope and renewal. In the following months, Jonathan faced a series of legal battles. His full cooperation earned him leniency, though his days as a revered millionaire were over. Pierce Investments survived in a downsized form, with Walton and Price stepping in to manage much of the operation. Jonathan moved out of the mansion for a time, allowing Marianne the space she needed to heal physically and emotionally. Deborah kept close to Marianne, offering grandmotherly support for little Lily. The question of whether Marianne and Jonathan would reconcile remained unanswered. Trust is fragile, once broken, not easily mended. Jonathan started therapy, attempting to understand his own moral failings and greed. He visited Lily regularly, cherishing every smile and coo. Marianne, guarded but not vengeful, focused on her newborn and the interior design business she was gradually reviving. She still lived in the mansion, though the estate felt haunted by the ghosts of betrayal. Over time, Jonathan's fortunes stabilized far from his former lofty status, but enough to provide for Lily. Marianne allowed him increasing involvement in Lily's life. They even shared civil dinners, discussing co-parenting strategies. Sometimes, in quiet corners of the house, Marianne found herself missing the husband she thought she had. But she also felt stronger, aware that she had navigated a nightmare and emerged with her dignity, albeit scarred. Angelica and her criminal associates went to trial, facing serious charges. Reports in the press detailed how she had entrapped several high-profile business figures across the globe, weaving an intricate web of blackmail and corruption. Jonathan's testimony proved pivotal in her conviction. She was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, cursing Jonathan's name as she left the courtroom. Marianne and Jonathan never quite returned to the blissful innocence of their early marriage, but they found a new equilibrium as co-parents dedicated to Lily's future. On some evenings, when Lily slept and Marianne gazed out over the Hudson River from the mansion's floor-to-ceiling windows, she reflected on the tumultuous journey. She had lost illusions about wealth, marriage, and security, but gained an unbreakable resolve. She discovered that in the face of betrayal, she held within herself the power to fight back, to protect, and to survive. Their story stood as both a cautionary tale and a testament to resilience. There would always be whispers in the corridors of high society about the millionaire who cast aside his pregnant wife for a mistress, only for it all to end in scandal. But there would also be whispers of how that same pregnant wife rose from the ashes of betrayal, forging a life of independence and strength for herself and her child. In the end, Marianne Pierce was no longer simply the decorative wife of a millionaire. She was a survivor, a mother, a businesswoman, and a testament to how, even when locked in the darkest of nights, one can find dawn breaking on the horizon. Thank you for joining us on this roller coaster of deception, heartbreak, and hard-won redemption. Marianne's journey reminds us all that even in life's darkest hours, the will to protect those we love can lead us to unimaginable courage. From Angelica's cunning betrayal to Jonathan's final attempts at atonement, this story proves how greed and ambition can topple even the strongest bonds. Yet it also showcases the resilience of the human spirit. Marianne fought for her own dignity and that of her unborn child, unearthing truths that saved her entire family from disaster. If you found yourself swept into this emotional saga, please give this video a thumbs up. Share it with friends who love a good real-life drama, and subscribe to this channel for more stories that explore the hidden corners of love, betrayal, and triumph. Your support keeps these tales alive. Thank you for watching.